Now, senior Victorian sources told Sky News that Brett Sutton, the Chief Medical Officer, has stood down. My information this afternoon is that there has been tension between Brett Sutton and the Premier now for several days.
Hello, I'm Paul Barry. Welcome to Media Watch. And with Victoria's pandemic still running rampant, it was no great surprise to hear the state's Chief Medical Officer had quit the job. After all, Brett Sutton had disappeared from the daily press briefing the day before, leaving his deputy to front the media, and Sky's Kieran Gilbert was confident his secret source was on the money.
This senior Victorian source up until this point has been rock solid with their information.
But as the investment cliche goes, past performance is no guarantee of future results. And with the Premier's office denying the story, Sky's Sutton scoop was soon looking decidedly shaky.
I guess we don't know where things are at. I mean, they've told me that he's standing down, and now the official line is that he's on leave.
And around 5 minutes after that, it was left to a stony-faced Andrew Clennell to declare,
"I've just had a text message from Daniel Andrews' office. It says Sutton has confirmed it's not true. They've got hold of Mr Sutton, who's on 3 days' leave, and he's saying he's sticking around."
Whoops. Juggling live TV and breaking news is always a challenge, and for the most part, Sky does it well. But in this case, the rush to be first and to hammer Dan Andrews backfired badly. But Sky was not the only one to jump the gun. The Daily Mail did it too.
Shock as Victoria's Chief Health Officer Brett Sutton quits his job.
And over on 3AW, Tom Elliott was just as eager to be first with the news.
We haven't been able to confirm this, but Drew says that Professor Brett Sutton is about to resign. So there you go, off-air word on the street.
Word on the street from a guy called Drew? Surely that's where the hot tip should have stayed until someone confirmed it. And as the Sutton story lit up on Twitter, one 3AW producer tweeted incredulously,
"Where on earth has the Sutton gone rumour come from? It is 100% not true."
Only to be told in reply by Victoria's Health Minister,
"Your radio station."
oh dear. And next day, when Dan Andrews was asked to put the Sutton rumour to bed, he promptly did.
He's having 3 days off. Nothing more, nothing less.
No such downtime, sadly, for the man who many on Sky call Chairman Dan, who was fronted up to 38 press conferences without a break, and who was confronted last week with an alarming front-page story in The Australian, claiming the state's pandemic was set to get even worse, despite the Stage 4 lockdown.
COVID cases peak still weeks away.
Secret modelling revealed.
And the secret forecasts were truly shocking, with predictions that daily new infections would soon hit more than 1,000 cases. As political editor Dennis Shanahan reported,
The Victorian government's own estimates, obtained by The Australian, show a steady worsening in the health crisis over coming weeks, with no decline in daily infection numbers until the final week of August.
and you can see how bad the forecast was from the graph that went with it. Scary stuff. And not surprisingly, the rest of the media was soon piling onto Shanahan's exclusive.
1,100 by the end of next week.
The modelling suggests that we're not going to hit our peak there until the last weeks of August, and significant numbers of new cases continuing to be recorded well into September and October.
And the grim warning of worse to come was also being recycled on the ABC's RN Breakfast. But there was just one problem. As Dan Andrews told reporters later that day, the leaked modelling was so secret that even the Victorian government was out of the loop.
The bloke who's in charge of the modelling has never seen it. Brendan Murphy has never seen it. No one in the government has ever seen it. That point could have been made last night, but the first we heard of the story was when it was printed.
Yes, the Australian hadn't bothered to check with the government before publishing where the modelling came from. Seriously. So, if it wasn't the government's, whose secret modelling was it, and where had it come from? Step forward Melbourne Twitter user Paul Sougleris, who told his 300 followers,
"I've been outed. Apparently, I'm the government data modeller."
And attached to his tweet was a very similar-looking COVID graph, based on his data plotting, which he'd posted 2 days before the Australian's front page. And if you slide the Australian's graph over the top of his, you'll see they are indeed pretty much a perfect match. Shanahan denies Sougleris was his source and says,
"The graphic image on the front of the Australian was not a reproduction."
Whatever that may mean. But Sugleris has absolutely no doubt the graph is the same, telling MediaWatch the Australian's version even reproduced the error he made, and pointing to this one-day spike in September.
It's not a government graph, it's mine, with my typo data input error spiking that gave away, like a map of Victoria with an extra island near Phillip Island.
We asked the Australian and Dennis Shanahan whether they believed the two graphs were the same, why they believed it was secret government modelling, whether they thought they had been tricked, and why they'd not contacted the government for comment. We did not get answers to any of those questions. And frankly, that just about says it all. You can read Dennis Shanahan's response on our website. Meanwhile, the latest numbers for new cases in Victoria are still grim, but show the 7-day average heading down, suggesting the peak may have passed. Finally, it's worth pointing out that when Paul Sugleris was asked if he had a background in epidemiology or modelling, he told The Guardian, "I am just a concerned citizen that felt I needed to graph the numbers that were publicly available." So much for the Australian's front page scoop. But now to footy news that the AFL does not want you to read, concerning a wag, a captain, a penalty and a reporter in the sin bin.
It was an expensive visit to a day spa. Richmond was fined $45,000 when Brooke Cotchin breached COVID protocols. She posted about it, and AFL.com journalist Mitch Cleary retweeted it.
Given the size of the story and the genuine interests in it, I felt I was adding another layer to the story.
So, what was the problem? Well, Mitch Cleary is a footy journalist who's employed by the AFL, along with a dozen other journos, to report on the game. And after his revealing retweet, his employers blew the whistle.
AFL stands down Mitch Cleary for sharing Wag's Instagram post.
It's understood the decision was made because the AFL believes Cleary's obligations are as an AFL employee before his obligations as a journalist.
And those obligations, in the AFL's view, are clearly to keep bad news under wraps to protect the people involved, even though the story was already out in the public domain, thanks to veteran footy journalist Caroline Wilson, who'd told 3AW...
In the case of Richmond, the captain's wife, Trent Cotchin, Brooke Cotchin, went to a local beauty salon and posted it on social media. I gather she had a facial or something like that, didn't ask permission.
In due course, 9, the Herald Sun, 7 and Yahoo Sport also followed up on the story and named the couple. And as Wilson later said on 9, there was no question it was news.
I don't see why putting something out on Twitter when it's been discussed so generally. I think it's laughable that you don't name the people involved when they've cost their clubs $20,000, when particularly it's the captain's wife and they themselves have put it on social media.
Yet, despite all this, the AFL was still keen to hide their identities. So, when Mitch Cleary shared the spa shot on Twitter, he was immediately sent to the bench, whereupon his teammates in the media joined the ruck.
I'm staggered that the AFL would do this. They consistently say that AFL media is independent from the AFL organisation, but that they have stood down one of their senior journalists for simply reporting the news.
Mitch thinks he's working as a journalist and he's been judged as working as an employee. So that's just a straight-out betrayal of journalism.
On Twitter, footy legends and writers were singing the same song.
This isn't North Korea. I'd be more inclined to stand down the person who made this decision.
The AFL is a laughingstock. Bullies.
The AFL have just slaughtered their own media brand.
And even Brooke Cotchin herself said suspending the journalist for sharing her post was a mistake.
I do not agree with him being stood down, and I have voiced that to the AFL.
So, did the AFL then bow to pressure and reinstate their reporter? Yes, they did. But it was Mitch, not them, who then stepped up to say sorry and take the blame.
Clearly, I wasn't aware of, the protection of the names that we had in place and the AFL had put in place. And, I can see it. I should have been across that, really. We made a call as a website not to name the individuals involved. And once I was made aware of that and asked to take the post down, I did so.
Meanwhile, the AFL told us in a statement that Mitch's crime was he did not follow editorial direction, adding,
AFL media journalists are free to report on AFL matters and regularly break stories, but are still expected to be bound by the editorial decisions of their editor.
Which, in this case, was to suppress names that had already been published. So, have we seen problems like this before? Answer, yes. Back in 2012, when it was launched, AFL Media promised to give its journalists free rein, telling MediaWatch,
Well, we've dealt with a lot of negative stories so far. We've reported on Andrew Demetrio's salary cut. We've reported on the AFL's annual results, which were a loss. We've reported on Etihad Stadium's complaints that the AFL allowed people in the crowd to have footballs kicked at them by players. These are all things that normally the AFL would not be expected to report on, and we've done that.
But despite valiant efforts by its journalists, the AFL has not always kept to those vows. In 2016, after revelations of illicit drug-taking by Collingwood star Dane Swan, former AFL coach Grant Thomas claimed,
"The silence is deafening from the media department at the AFL, which just goes to show they have too much control over information going to the general public."
Adding,
"There's general acknowledgement that the AFL are pathetically predictable in how they go about defending their brand."
And veteran footy writer Rowan Connolly claims that AFL media content is now becoming more lifestyle and brand focused, and in his view, the Cleary saga is
particularly unfortunate now because the exposure of the preparedness to undermine basic journalistic tenets to protect AFL policy comes as those principles are simultaneously also being undermined by slavish devotion to corporate interests.
Clearly, the AFL does not see a problem. But people looking for footy news, as opposed to footy PR, may well decide there is and choose to look elsewhere. But now, to one of the Daily Telegraph's star columnists, Miranda Devine, who was last week sued for defamation for suggesting, back in February, that a 9-year-old Indigenous boy, Quaden Bayles, who has dwarfism, may be scamming the public out of hundreds of thousands of dollars by faking distress on social media. So why on earth did Miranda do that? Well, back in February, Quaden's mother was so upset at her son being bullied at school in Brisbane that she posted this disturbing video on social media.
And I want people to know, parents, educators, teachers, this is the effect that bullying has.
I'm going to kill myself.
This is what bullying does.
Within days, an American comedian had set up a GoFundMe page for Quaden and raised $300,000 to send him to Disneyland. And support had flowed in from Hollywood stars like Hugh Jackman.
Quaden, you are stronger than you know, mate.
And soon after that, the little boy was leading out the Indigenous All-Stars team in their match in Brisbane. So, a heartwarming story, except that the trolls on social media were by now all over it, claiming the boy was really 18 years old and a fraud.
Quaden Bayles is an Australian actor whose mum, Yarrika, posted a fake sobbing video of him on Tuesday. The MSM and Hollywood fell for it and got him $300K plus in donations. Here, Quaden counts his acting money. Will Quaden's mum return the donations?
It was nasty, crazy nonsense, but Miranda Devine retweeted the claims on Twitter and added this comment.
"That's really rotten if this was a scam. Hurts genuine bullying victims." Over to Daily Telegraph.
And when someone replied,
"It's a crime if it is a scam. Child abuse. How could any one parent do this?"
Devine doubled down by replying,
"Yep, exactly. On the case."
The conspiracy theory was always absurd, and by the time Devine was giving it credence, it had already been shown to be nonsense, with the fact-checkers at Snopes.com debunking it. And soon afterwards, Studio 10 revealed that Quaden had appeared on their show in 2015 as a 4-year-old.
Quaden actually appeared on Studio 10 back in 2015 when he was 4 with his mum. Wow. There he is, and cool. Was missing his front 2 teeth, wasn't he?
Yet, despite all this, Devine did not immediately delete her tweets or back down. And when I suggested that she step up and apologise, and that columnists had a duty to check crazy theories before spreading them, she replied,
"Typical of the real P. Barry's sloppy research. I never mentioned anything about age. Dishonest diversion."
But in fact, she had talked about Quaden's age, accusing his mother of, quote,
"coaching the kid to say those things that no 9-year-old would say."
So it's hard to argue that Devine does not deserve a raspberry for being stupid, mean and unprofessional. But should a case like this really tie up the courts? I don't think so. And that's not because tweets and retweets are immune from such action. Mark Latham, for example, had to pay more than $100,000 to settle with journalist Osman Faruqi after accusing him of fostering anti-white racism. And Latham reportedly paid another $100K to UNSW student Mohammed Nizamdeen after suggesting he was a terrorist. But those accusations were a lot more direct than Devine's casual and conditional retweet. On the other hand, Miranda could easily have solved the problem by apologising and admitting she was wrong, and she probably still could. Only don't hold your breath for that. In the meantime, what she has done is retweet sympathetic stories about Quaden and wish him the best. Let's see where it all ends up. That's all from us tonight. There's more on our website, including statements from the AFL and Dennis Shanahan. And don't forget, Media Bites every Thursday on your favourite social media platform. But for now, until next week, goodbye.